she was 12, blind, and left in the rain like trash by her own mother. Sold to a billionaire who didn't need another child, but saw something no one else ever had. She gave him her heart, her genius, even her kidney. But when he was dying, his real family walked away. She stayed. And what he did next will shatter everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and true legacy. The rain came down in angry sheets, soaking through Alora's tattered dress as she stood shivering outside the luxury black car. Her mother, Janet, didn't even hold her hand. She just muttered under her breath, checking her phone every few seconds, impatient. Alora couldn't see the mansion towering in front of her, but she could feel the coldness in the air, not just from the storm, but from her mother's silence. At just 12 years old, blind since birth, Alora had learned how to sense things people didn't say. And today, everything in her mother's silence screamed abandonment. Janet knocked on the polished wooden door with a shaky hand. It opened to reveal a tall, sharply dressed man with storm gray eyes and an unreadable face. Ethan Callahan, billionaire CEO of Calitech Industries. The same man Janet had met only once before, and now the one she was about to sell her daughter to for a stack of unmarked cash and a non-disclosure agreement. She's quiet. Smart, too, Janet said quickly, pushing Alora forward without so much as a goodbye hug. I just can't keep her anymore. Ethan's eyes moved to the girl, small and soaked, her blind eyes unblinking, lips trembling. You're sure about this? He asked. Janet didn't answer. She just turned around, heels clacking on the wet marble, and walked away without looking back. As the door shut behind her, Alora whispered into the emptiness, "Mom?" No answer. Only the sound of thunder echoing through the halls of a mansion she couldn't see. Ethan watched her closely. There was something about the way she held herself, fragile but proud. "Come in, Alora," he said softly. She flinched. No one had said her name so gently in years. But if Ethan thought he had just taken in a helpless blind girl, he had no idea the storm that was coming. The warmth inside the mansion didn't reach Alora. The marble floor was cold beneath her feet, the silence even colder. She could hear the hush of whispered voices from behind pillars and the curious, almost disgusted tone of a child asking, "Is that her?" It was Lana, the elder of Ethan's daughters. Alora stiffened. She didn't need eyes to feel unwelcome. Ethan led her down a long hallway, one hand gently guiding her by the shoulder. "You'll have your own room," he said. "Anything you need, just ask." But Alora didn't know how to ask for something she had never known. Safety, love, acceptance. In her mind, this was just another stop before the next goodbye. Still, she nodded. "Thank you, sir." He paused. "You can call me Ethan, or Dad, if you ever feel comfortable." That word, Dad, hit her like a wave. She had never heard it spoken to her in sincerity before. Upstairs, Vanessa watched with arms folded tightly across her chest. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the glass of white wine in her hand. "So she's really staying?" she asked coolly as Ethan returned from settling Alora in. "You just brought home a blind girl and expect this house to adjust." Ethan didn't respond. He was staring at a photo on the mantel, his late sister, the one who had been blind too. "She's not a project, Vanessa. She's brilliant. I can feel it." That night, Alora lay in the dark, listening. She memorized every creak in the walls, every distance between steps, every scent. Didn't cry. She never cried. Crying was for people who hoped things might get better. But as she turned her head toward the sound of Ethan's footsteps fading down the hallway, she whispered, "Maybe. This time." Down the hall, Vanessa made a silent promise. That girl will never belong here. Morning in the Callahan mansion was a performance. Elegant clinks of silverware, muted conversations, and the practiced laughter of wealth. Alora sat at the far end of the breakfast table, quietly tracing the edge of her teacup with a trembling finger. No one had spoken to her. Not Vanessa, not Lana, not Chloe, who just giggled with her sister like Alora, wasn't even there. Ethan, always early, took notice. "Alora, what would you like for breakfast?" he asked, smiling. "Pancakes?" She nodded timidly, whispering, "With strawberries, please." Chloe made a face. "She talks?" Lana smirked, biting into her toast. Vanessa simply kept sipping her coffee, as if Alora had dirtied the porcelainaire. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he excused himself to a meeting. When the tutor arrived later that day, expecting to guide a special needs child, he found Alora sitting in the study, waiting. By the end of their first hour, he was in stunned silence. Alora had already memorized the entire periodic table. She could recite classic poetry, and her mental math was faster than the calculator on his phone. "She's gifted," he murmured to Ethan afterward. "Genius even, especially with code and logic." Vanessa wasn't impressed. "So what? She's a circus act now." But Ethan's eyes lit up. He brought in more experts, more tools, more books in Braille. He called her Bright Star. Slowly, Alora began to bloom piano by ear, coding without sight, languages by listening alone. But the more she shone, the darker Vanessa's heart grew. That night, Alora passed by the closed study door and overheard Vanessa's sharp whisper, "She's trying to outshine my girls. You'll regret this, Ethan." Alora stepped back into the shadows, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to be a threat, but something told her she already was. Alora had grown used to darkness, but the shadows in the Callahan home weren't from her blindness. They were the kind that slithered between walls and whispered behind her back. Vanessas Cruelty didn't come in slaps or screams. It came in subtle torments. Books misplaced, Braille pages stained with ink, her piano seat removed before lessons. Every act calculated, quiet, deniable. Alora said nothing. She didn't want Ethan to worry. He was the only person who had ever seen her as more than a burden. She clung to his affection like oxygen. She worked harder, spoke softer, and smiled through the ache in her chest. But each time Ethan left for business, Vanessa tightened her grip. One night, after accidentally knocking over a glass vase while memorizing her path to the music room, Vanessa snapped, "You think this is your house now? You walk around here like you belong. But you don't. You're a guest, a charity case." Alora stood still, heart racing. "I didn't mean to." "Save your breath," Vanessa hissed, stepping closer. "You're making my daughters invisible." The next morning, Ethan found Alora outside on the patio, curled up beside her piano with her head resting on the keys. She had fallen asleep composing. He knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "You're not just gifted, Alora. You're special. To me." Her throat tightened, but she smiled. It was the only safe place she knew. His voice. Later that week, a staff member confessed what Vanessa had done to the music room. Ethan confronted his wife. Furious, she denied it with the calmness of practiced deceit. But he didn't believe her. That night, Vanessa stood outside Alora's door, watching her sleep. And in the dark, she whispered, "You may have fooled him, but I see through you." The official papers arrived on a Thursday morning, sealed in a thick envelope with Ethan's signature scrawled in dark ink. The adoption was finalized. Alora Grace Bennett Callahan was now, by law and love, his daughter. Ethan hadn't told her yet. He wanted the moment to be just right. But the pride he carried that day was visible in every step, every glance toward her as she played soft melodies on the grand piano. Alora was radiant in her quiet way, fingers gliding over keys, swaying gently to music she alone could hear. Her world had no sight, but it was full of color. Ethan watched her with awe. She had become the heartbeat of his home. "You changed this place," he whispered to her once. "You changed me." That evening, he knelt beside her and held her hand. "Alora," he said gently, "you're not just someone I care for. You're my daughter. Officially, legally, but most of all, by heart." Her lips parted. She didn't speak. Tears welled in the corners of her sightless eyes. And then, barely a whisper, she said the words she had never spoken to anyone before: "Dad." But not everyone celebrated. Vanessa stared at the adoption certificate with barely concealed fury. Lana and Chloe overheard the news from the hallway and exchanged glances thick with resentment. "She's not even one of us," Chloe muttered. "Dad didn't ask us," Lana added, voice sharp. "He just did it." Later that night, as Alora settled into bed, Ethan kissed her forehead and left a soft teddy bear on her pillow. A gift from the first day she arrived, now restitched and whole. Downstairs, Vanessa poured herself another glass of wine and made a quiet vow. If Alora thought she belonged now, she was in for a painful surprise. The winter that year was sharp and cruel. Snow blanketed the Callahan estate, but inside the mansion, something colder stirred. 14-year-old Alora had just returned from winning an inter-school tech competition. Her AI model stunned judges, earning her a full feature in a national innovation journal. Ethan was ecstatic. He threw a small celebration in her honor, showering her with praise and wrapping her in a proud embrace that made her feel, just for a moment, like she belonged. But Vanessa's eyes never smiled. Lana's health had been quietly deteriorating for months, and now the diagnosis was in. Stage 3, kidney failure. Panic set in like poison. Ethan flew to Switzerland to consult specialists. Vanessa stayed behind with her daughters and Alora. It was then that the unthinkable happened. One rainy evening, Alora was sedated under the pretense of a routine checkup. When she awoke days later, sore and weak, the house was silent. No one explained. No one mentioned the scar low on her side, but she heard things, murmurs between nurses, the strange hush in Vanessa's voice. Something had been taken, and deep down, she knew. Ethan returned to a healed Lana and a frail Alora. He hugged them both. "She saved her sister," Vanessa said with a painted smile. Alora insisted, "She's such a selfless girl." Alora didn't deny it. Her silence wasn't consent. It was fear. If she accused Vanessa, would she be sent away? Would Ethan believe her? That night, Alora stood before the mirror, fingertips tracing the edge of her bandage. She couldn't see the scar, but she could feel it. And as a single tear slid down her cheek, she whispered to herself, "One day, he'll know everything." Time moved forward, but Alora's body never fully caught up. She was weaker now, more prone to fatigue, sometimes breathless during her piano sessions, but she never complained, not once. Ethan, seeing her pale face and slower steps, tried to cut back her schedule, but Alora insisted she was fine. What she wouldn't say, what she couldn't say, was that a piece of her had been stolen, and not just her kidney. Vanessa returned to her perfect life, basking in praise for managing everything so well during Ethan's absence. Lana recovered fast, showered with affection and gifts. Chloe was already planning her next holiday in Paris. Alora, meanwhile, became a quiet shadow in the house she once lit up. And yet, even with the weight she bore, Alora kept creating. She spent hours in the tech lab Ethan built for her, designing programs that could help the visually impaired. She coded by touch, voice, and memory, flawless and focused. Her talent had become a force even Vanessa could not diminish. The world outside was beginning to notice her. One evening, Ethan found Alora alone in the lab. asleep on her keyboard. He gently covered her with a blanket and stared at the soft rise and fall of her breath. "She's changed everything," he whispered. He couldn't explain it, but Alora had awakened a side of him that had been buried since losing his sister. A few days later, Alora received a national award for young innovators. During her speech, she spoke not of her blindness, but of possibility. Her words brought tears to the audience. Yet Ethan noticed how fragile she looked under the spotlight. After the event, Vanessa cornered her in the hallway, voice like venom. "Enjoy your moment, Alora, because soon people will see you for what you really are." And for the first time, Alora whispered back, "Maybe, but they'll never see what you really are." Ethan kept journals. Not publicly, not for memoirs, but quiet pages tucked away in leather-bound notebooks behind his study bookshelf. He wrote in them during sleepless nights. Thoughts about his business, his regrets, and, more recently, about Alora. One afternoon, while tidying his office, Alora accidentally brushed her hand against one of the notebooks. Curious, she felt the binding and quietly tucked it under her arm. Later that night, she asked her speech reader to dictate it aloud. It began with Ethan's memories of his sister. Blind, brilliant, and kind, taken too young by a degenerative disease. "She was my light," he had written. "I spent years trying to fill the void she left. Then Alora came, and the light returned. Her spirit, her mind, so much like my sister's, but even stronger." His words spilled love, admiration, and quiet guilt for not seeing sooner how special Alora truly was. "I may not have birthed her, but in every way that matters, she is my daughter. The daughter I didn't know I needed." Tears streamed down Alora's cheeks as the reader fell silent. No one had ever written about her like that. No one had ever seen her like that. She clutched the notebook to her chest like a treasure. Because that's what it was. The next day, she waited on the patio where he liked to read. When Ethan approached, she simply said, "I read your journal." His eyes widened. Before he could speak, she threw her arms around him. "I love you, Dad." It was the first time she'd ever said the word fully, without hesitation. In that moment, neither of them saw the camera peeking from the hallway, held by Chloe, her face twisted in suspicion. And behind her, Vanessa, smiling coldly. It's time we remind Ethan who his real family is. Ethan's collapse was sudden. One minute, he was giving a keynote speech at a global tech summit, praising young innovators. The next, he staggered, clutched his side, and crumpled to the stage floor. Cameras flashed, gasps rang out, and chaos erupted. Alora wasn't there, but when the news reached her, she dropped the phone in shock, her legs giving way beneath her. The diagnosis was grim. Renal failure, advanced. The doctor's words were cold and clinical. Without a transplant, his time is limited. Ethan was rushed home under 24-hour care. Alora never left his side. She sat at his bedside, reading to him, feeding him, praying in silence while the rest of the house felt colder than ever. Vanessa cried for the cameras. She posted tributes online, but behind closed doors, she was already contacting lawyers. "What's the status of the will?" she asked, voice clipped. "I want everything secure for our girls." Lana and Chloe didn't hide their detachment. Chloe began spending more time out with her new boyfriend. Lana scrolled endlessly through her phone, occasionally looking up to complain about how depressing the house had become. When Ethan asked for time with them, they made excuses. "Dad, you're making this so dramatic," Chloe snapped one night. Meanwhile, Alora stayed. She read him his favorite books. She played piano near his window when he couldn't sleep. She kissed his forehead every night. One morning, the doctor broke the news. Ethan would need a kidney transplant, and none of the girls were matches, except for Alora. She had only one kidney left. Vanessa scoffed. "She's done it once. She can do it again." Chloe nodded. It's the least she can do. After all he's done for her. Alora listened in silence and whispered, "I'll do it." But what she didn't know was that Ethan had heard everything. The news spread through the mansion like wildfire. Alora had volunteered to donate her remaining kidney. Vanessa said nothing at first, but her smirk told another story. Lana shrugged. Chloe rolled her eyes. "Of course she would," they said. "She lives for attention." But Ethan looked at Alora with a pain that went beyond illness. There was sorrow in his eyes. Something else. Guilt. He reached for her hand that evening, his voice faint. "You don't have to do this, sweetheart." Alora smiled softly. "I want to. I'm not afraid." "You should be," he whispered. "You only have one left." "Then you can have it," she said, her voice barely holding together. "You gave me everything." He turned his face away so she wouldn't see the tears streaming down his cheeks. Preparations began. Papers signed, tests confirmed. The surgery would take place in 3 days. Alora spent those nights sleeping on the couch by Ethan's bed, clutching his hand in hers. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, staring at her, as if memorizing every line of her face. On the last night before the surgery, Ethan pulled her close. "If something happens to me, promise me you'll keep creating. You'll keep changing the world." He had forgotten that she might not have the chance. Alora nodded, tears soaking her chest. "Promise me you'll forgive them too." Her body stiffened. "I don't know if I can." "Then promise me. You'll try." "I promise." The morning of the surgery was quiet. The halls were still. Vanessa and her daughters didn't come. They had a spa appointment booked in the city. Alora kissed Ethan's forehead before the nurses wheeled her away. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. He looked at her, broken, trembling, and said, "You'll always be my daughter." But as the doors closed behind her, he whispered something to the nurse beside him. "Call Dr. Avery. It's time." Alora lay on the surgical bed, surrounded by sterile white walls and soft beeping monitors. Her chest rose and fell slowly, each breath reminding her that this might be the last act of her life. She had no fear, only peace. If this was the cost of saving the only person who had ever truly loved her, it was worth it. Ethan sat in a private waiting room, hands clasped together, chest heaving. He was wearing the hospital gown, hooked up to wires, but it was all theater, carefully orchestrated. Every lab test, every doctor's diagnosis, fabricated by his most trusted medical team. Only 2 people knew the truth: Ethan and Dr. Avery, the renowned surgeon he'd privately hired for what was to come. From a distance, Ethan watched through a glass window as nurses prepared Alora for anesthesia. His heart broke at the sight. She looked so small, so pale, her long fingers folded neatly on her chest. She was ready to give him everything, again. "I have to do this," Ethan said, voice shaking. "Yes, you must," Dr. Avery replied gently. "This is the only way to show her, and the world, who truly deserves your legacy." Down the hall, Vanessa and the girls were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even texted. Not a call, not a visit. They believed Ethan would soon be gone, and their inheritance, theirs for the taking. Moments before the anesthesia could be administered, Ethan stormed into the room. "Stop everything!" he barked. Nurses froze. Alora stirred, confused. "Dad?" He rushed to her side, grabbing her hand. "There will be no surgery," he said, tears falling. "I'm not dying, Alora. I never was." Her lips trembled. "But why?" "Because I had to know," he said. "I had to see who would stay when the lights went out." And just as she gasped, barely processing the shock, he whispered, "And now, it's time I give you something back." Alora sat upright in the hospital bed, her face pale with shock. "You're not dying?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded slowly, still holding her hand. No, sweetheart. I faked the illness. I needed to see who would stand by me. Not for money, not for status, but for love. His voice cracked. And you didn't hesitate. Even with only one kidney left, you offered me the other. Why? Tears slipped down Alora's cheeks.
Because you were the first person who ever saw me. The only one who never looked at me like a mistake.
She sobbed, curling into arms. You gave me a life. I wanted to give you one back. Ethan held her like a father holds a child he almost lost. I didn't bring you here to break you. I brought you here to heal you. And now, it's time. From the doorway, Dr. Avery stepped in. Are you ready to tell her? Ethan nodded. Alora wiped her tears.
Tell me... What?
Ethan took a deep breath. For the past 4 years, I've secretly funded research for advanced optical regeneration. I partnered with doctors across Europe and Asia. And now, we have a chance. A real one. She stared in stunned silence. We found a specialist. He believes he can restore some of your vision. Maybe all of it. The technology is still experimental, but the odds are higher than ever. Her lips parted. I could see? Maybe not perfectly at first, Dr. Avery said gently. But you'll see light, shapes, colors, and eventually, maybe even faces. Alora began to cry again, this time from a place of disbelief and hope. For the first time in her life, she dared to dream of light. Ethan kissed her forehead. This is your gift, Alora. Not just for what you did, but for who you are. But neither of them knew. Vanessa had just returned home, and she had seen Ethan's latest will, signed, sealed, and devastating. The operating room was bathed in sterile white, but for Alora, it felt like the edge of a new universe. As the medical team prepared for the procedure, Ethan held her hand until the very last moment, whispering, "No matter what happens, you've already given me more than I ever deserved." Alora smiled weakly, her eyes fluttering shut. "Just promise me one thing," she whispered. "If I open my eyes and see you, don't be crying like a baby." The surgery lasted nearly 6 hours. Outside the theater, Ethan paced like a man waiting for a miracle. Vanessa had returned that morning, rage simmering under her icy facade. She stormed into Ethan's study and found what she feared: his new will. Alora, now 18, was the sole heir. Every company, every estate, every share, left in the name of the blind girl she'd tried to erase. She hurried to the hospital. "Are you insane?" she screamed. "You're handing over everything to her?" Ethan didn't flinch. "She gave me her heart when everyone else waited to take my wallet." Vanessa's face turned pale. "We're your family." He stared her down. "Then why did me to die?" Meanwhile, in the recovery room, Alora stirred. The bandages were thick, but the ache behind her eyes was different, brighter. Dr. Avery leaned in gently. "Alora, I need you to tell me what you see." Her lashes fluttered. She gasped. "Light," she whispered. "I see light." Her voice cracked. "And shadows. There's movement." Ethan ran to her side, voice trembling. "Alora?" She turned her head slowly, and for the first time in her life, saw the outline of a man with gentle eyes, a warm smile, and tears falling freely. "Dad," she whispered, reaching for his face. He took her hand and placed it over his heart. "You brought me back to life, Alora. Now it's time the world sees you." And downstairs, Vanessa's fury turned to fear, because she knew her time was up. The Callahan estate had never known such silence. Not even Vanessa's sharp stilettos dared echo as she stood frozen, staring at the will again. Every line, every clause was clear. Alora Grace Callahan, sole heir, the business empire, the properties, the foundation, even the private island. Her daughters, Lana and Chloe, received small trust funds, sufficient for comfortable lives, but nowhere near what they had expected.
What is this?
Chloe screamed.
She's not even blood!
Vanessa's voice shook. This is war. But Ethan had anticipated it all. He called a press conference the following day. The media buzzed with questions. Rumors of his terminal illness had shaken global markets. But now, here he was. Alive, standing strong, hand in hand with a young woman the world barely knew. She is my daughter, Ethan declared. Not by blood, but by loyalty, compassion, brilliance, and love. When I was at my lowest, she stood by me. When I had nothing to offer, she offered me everything. That's more than I've ever received from those who share my name. Cameras flashed, headlines erupted. Billionaire leaves entire empire to blind adopted daughter. The girl who gave her last kidney and gained the world. Vanessa tried to contest the will. Lana and Chloe tried to discredit Alora online, spreading lies and edited footage. But Ethan's legal team dismantled every claim with precision. And when they were offered a final settlement on one condition, they took it. The condition? They were never to contact Alora again. That evening, Alora sat in her room, unwrapping a gift Ethan had left on her pillow. It was a music boxa ballerina spinning to the tune she used to hum when no one listened. Beneath it, a note in Ethan's handwriting. For the girl who brought music back to this home, you gave me more than a family. You gave me faith. She closed her eyes, tears falling softly. Tomorrow, she would walk into the world as Alora Grace Callahan, heiress to an empire. But in her heart, she was still the girl who once whispered into the dark, maybe this time. 1 year later, the Callahan Institute for the Blind and Gifted stood tall at the heart of the city, a glass masterpiece designed by Alora herself. Inside, halls buzzed with young minds once overlooked by the world. Children with white canes, adaptive tech, and fierce brilliance walked with pride. It was more than a school. It was a promise. She stood backstage in a flowing navy gown, her posture regal, eyes radiant, fully restored. The surgery had been a complete success. She had watched the world unfold, color by color, face by face, light by glorious light. The first face she ever truly saw had been Ethan's, tear-streaked, smiling, whispering, "There you are." Now, she could see it all. The future, the purpose, herself. Ethan sat in the front row, older, slower, but eyes gleaming with unshed tears. He had retired quietly, stepping back to let Alora lead. She insisted he keep the title founder. He insisted she take president. Neither argued long. They had nothing left to prove to each other. The room fell silent as Alora stepped onto the stage. Spotlights kissed her features. No cane, no fear, only power wrapped in grace. Her eyes scanned the audience. Eyes that once saw only darkness now filled with fire. And her voice, clear, steady, filled the room. I was born blind, sold by my own mother, raised in silence, seen as a burden. But then one man saw something no one else did. He gave me more than shelter. He gave me purpose. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. When he fell, I gave him what little I had left. And when I fell, he gave me the one thing I never dreamed possible. Sight. Not just of the world, but of who I really was. She turned toward Ethan, now openly crying. I am his daughter, not by blood, but by choice. And today, I dedicate this institute in his honor, and for every child who was once unseen. The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. And in the quiet that followed, Ethan whispered to himself, voice trembling, she doesn't just have my heart, she has my vision. Hope you enjoyed the story. Subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Catch you on the next one. Cheers!